למלך על כל הארץ. היום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד, הוי והיה השם למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד, אוי ננאי 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 נאי נאי ננאי נאי 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 אוי נאי 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 השם למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד, אוי והיה השם למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד, אוי ננאי 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 נאי 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 אוי נאי 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 שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. תישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה, וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. אוי 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 אוי, שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, אוי מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אני אתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. אוי 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 אוי, שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, אוי מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם. צדיק כתמר יפרח, כארז בלבנון יסגה. צדיק כתמר
Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Welcome to this week's World Alliance of Qara'im Torah study. First, let me just start off by making sure you guys can all hear me. Can I get a sound check? Somebody just give me a yes or a one, or just let me know that I am heard. Okay, cool, good. All right, we're going to start our Torah study. If you guys only knew what I had to go through this week to bring the Torah study, you wouldn't believe it. Let's just put it this way. I have some relatives in town, which means it was time to get the heck out of Dodge for a while. And I won't even tell you where I am giving this Torah study, but you wouldn't believe it if I told you anyway. So, but we're going to do a full Torah study, and it should be a good one. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue I've decided at this point to disconnect from the weekly Parsha. Maybe we'll reconnect at a later time, but at this point, we're going to disconnect from the weekly Parsha, and we're going to continue in Leviticus because I think it's important. I think these are parts of the Torah which are skipped over, as I always like to call them, flyover country, Torah flyover country, right? They're just glossed by. Nobody really understands them, and they're not really that hard to understand. It's a very beautiful logical system once it's seen all together. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to continue this week in Leviticus chapter 8, and we're going to see. So Leviticus chapters 1 through 7, as we've been doing for the past number of weeks, is the 5 basic types of sacrifice, right? Let's review that. That's going to be the fire offering. I'm giving the colloquial translations: the fire offering, the grain offering, the peace offering, the sin offering, and the guilt offering. So now we've finished that unit, Leviticus 1 through 7. That's an entire unit of study, okay? If you ever want to do a study with a group, with your family, with your kids, anything like that, take that unit, Leviticus 1 through 7, and just study it as a unit, and you'll get so much out of it. It's unbelievable. And again, the motivation or the reasoning, as I've always said, is that these sacrifices, these types of sacrifices are mentioned throughout the Tanakh. And when you give them context, when you understand what they are and what the purpose of each one is, and we're going to see that now in Leviticus 8, when we have the installation of the Kohanim and the Levites, we're going to see some of these sacrifices that we've been told about in 1 through 7. We're now going to see them actually brought. So we're going to see, and we can ask, oh, why is a sin offering being brought? Oh, well, sin offering, we know a sin offering is atonement for inadvertent sin. We know there are 4 types of sin offerings: one for the Kohen Gadol, one for the all of the people, one for a leader, and one for an average lay Israelite. And now, which of those 4 types of sin offerings is being brought, or those 4 contexts of sin offering is being brought? Oh, that gives it so much more meaning when we see what's going on there, right? And we see this throughout the Tanakh. Bulls are sacrificed, fire offerings, burnt offerings, peace offerings, nidava, free will offerings, payment of vow offerings, all this kind of stuff. Okay, so we are going to have actually a great, I don't want to say the word advantage, that's the wrong way to put it. We're going to have a great insight into the rest of the Tanakh when we know these 5 basic types of offerings and what each one is brought for. Okay, so with that being in mind, I think we'll get going. And let's see, hopefully we're not going to run out of batteries. We will try our best. There might be a certain point where I actually run out of battery and I might have to stop the study short, but I'll try to extend the battery as long as I can. And so with that being said, let me bring up Leviticus chapter 8. By the way, if you missed the previous studies, just read through, even in English, read through chapters 1 through 7, or even what I love to do when I'm driving in the car or cooking food or something like that. I'll just put on a YouTube video of, anywhere in the Tanakh that I want to. The entire Tanakh is in English and much of it in Hebrew as well, but in English on YouTube. If you type in NIV, that's the type of the translation, the New International Version, and then you type in the name of the book. So let's say NIV Leviticus, you will get a YouTube video, which is basically an audio of the book of Leviticus being read in English. So you can do chapters 1 through 7, or let's say you want to, hear you're cooking up nachos and cheese. That's my signature dish. You're cooking up your nachos and cheese, and you want to. I think I'll listen to the book of Ecclesiastes. Okay, so while you're cooking, you can hop on the book of Ecclesiastes or whatever you want, right? So the entire thing is on the internet, and it's really great. Okay, even if you listen to it in English, it's not ideal. It doesn't give as much depth as the Hebrew, but it it gives an overview, right? It does give some depth. It's better than just not doing it at all. Let's put it that way. Okay. All right. So all that being said, let me do another sound check. Can you guys hear me? One more sound check, please. Somebody let me know you can hear me. Okay, great. Okay, terrific. So here we go. Let me share the screen. We're in Leviticus chapter 8. Leviticus chapter 8. Hebrew. And we'll bring up our usual commentaries, the usual suspects as needed. But let me share the screen in the meantime. Okay, and there we go. So we are in Leviticus chapter 8. We're starting verse 1. Okay, Vaydaber Yahweh el Moshe lemor. So Yahweh spoke to Moses to say. So now we have, as the English headline here implies, Moses consecrates Aaron and his son. So this is basically the installation of the Levites. Let's just review a little bit. The end of the book of Exodus, at the very end of the book of Exodus, we had the tabernacle set up, and we had the glory of Yahweh, Kavod Yahweh, the glory of God descending into the tent of meeting, into the tabernacle. Then that's the end of the book of Exodus. Immediately in the book of Leviticus, we have the first 7 chapters speaking about the 5 basic types of sacrifices. And now the temple has just, or the tabernacle has just been newly built, and Yahweh has moved in, so to speak. We saw that in Exodus 40. Let's take a look at that for a second. English. Okay, so setting up the tabernacle. Right, so here we have all the details of the tabernacle, which was described in detail from from Exodus approximately 35 onwards. No, earlier than that, 35, whatever. And now we have the glory of Yahweh. So this is the end of the book of Exodus. I'll just read it in English. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of Yahweh filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled on it, and the glory of Yahweh filled the tabernacle. By the way, we could do an entire series of studies on this idea of Kavod Yahweh, the glory of Yahweh. This is basically Yahweh's presence or his essence on planet Earth. He can't move in. He has no physical shape. He's outside of space and time. So what moves in? What acts in this world of space and time, this physical world? It's something that the Torah calls, or the Tanakh calls, the Kavod Yahweh, the glory of Yahweh. It's the same Kavod Yahweh, the same glory of Yahweh that Moses asked to see. And Yahweh said, I will put you in a nook in the rock. I'll cover you over, and then I'll let my glory pass by, and you could see the aftermath of it. Sometimes poorly translated as the back. Okay, it's kind of like, let's say you can't look into the eye of a storm for whatever reason, or you can't look into a storm because it's too dangerous to be outside during the storm. But we'll let the storm pass by, and then we'll see the aftermath of the storm. It's not a good analogy because the aftermath is destruction, but you get the idea. So nobody could look directly at the glory of Yahweh, at the Kavod Yahweh. But you could see the aftermath of it, or Moses was able to see the aftermath of it. But it ultimately settles in the tabernacle, in the Holy of Holies, the Kadosh Kadoshim, on the ark cover, between the cherubim. That's where the Kavod Yahweh settles, as we'll see here. And it stays there until basically it's kicked out, and that's spoken about in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 10 or so, where the glory of Yahweh, finally, Yahweh, after hundreds and hundreds of years, is fed up with the Israelites and says, I'm out of here. I'm getting out of this hellhole. It's like when my father moved out of the South Bronx in the 1950s, and all the Jews fled the South Bronx and moved to Queens, Long Island, all this kind of stuff. My father moved to Queens. Actually, my mother also fled the Bronx and moved to Queens. They met in Queens, well, technically meet in Queens, but they were both living in Queens when they met. At any rate, so that's the idea. Yahweh sees, spoken about extensively in the book of Leviticus, all the abominations that the Israelites are doing, and he says, time to get the heck out of this neighborhood. I don't fit in here anymore. I'm gone. And Ezekiel speaks about the kavod Yahweh, the glory of Yahweh, lifting up from the temple and then basically going away. Okay, so it's this kavod Yahweh that is the presence of Yahweh on this earth. Does it have a physical entity, or does it have a physical aspect to it? Absolutely not. Okay, it's kind of like an emanation of spiritual energies, maybe the only way I could kind of understand it, that emanates from a certain specific place on planet Earth. But for all intents and purposes, it's the closest that Yahweh can come to living on this planet, and he moves in to the tabernacle when it's built. Okay, where was it before? It was in the cloud. We see the cloud. Okay, the cloud led the Israelites, and the glory of Yahweh was in that cloud that led the Israelites. Okay, but it was in the cloud because Yahweh didn't have a permanent home yet. Well, a semi-permanent home. He didn't have a tent to live in. Now the Israelites, in the second half book of Exodus, build him a tent, and it's moving day. Exodus 40 is basically moving day. Yahweh's house, his dream house, has been built, which sometimes turns out later on to be a nightmare house, but in theory, a dream house. Shabbat shalom, everybody. And he moves in. It's all set up exactly the way he wants it. Hey, it's his house, right? He could set it up just like if you buy a piece of land and you speak to the architect and you say, I want it this way and I want it that way. I want a pink powder puff roof. I think that was from the Brady Bunch, something growing up. And the architect says, we don't do pink powder puff roofs or whatever. But if you own the house, or if you own the land and you build the house, you decide how you want it. It's your house. You set it up the way you want it, right? So Yahweh explains in the latter half of the book of Exodus how he wants it set up, and then it's built that way, and then it's done, and now it's moving day at the end of the book of Exodus. And we see here, then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of Yahweh filled the tabernacle. Okay, the glory of Yahweh, kavod Yahweh. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled on it, and the glory of Yahweh filled the tabernacle. So even Moses, we know, cannot look at this kavod Yahweh. He cannot look at the glory of Yahweh. So we know that the only time that anyone enters into the Holy of Holies is on the 10th day of the 7th month, also known as Yom Kippurim, which is understood usually as the day that we gain atonement for ourselves, for our own sins. But really what it is it's a cleansing day. It's a spiritual cleansing. I hate that word spiritual, but it is, for lack of a better word, it's a spiritual cleansing day for the tabernacle, for the tent of meeting, for the temple. I kind of use those three interchangeably when we're speaking about them in a colloquial sense, right? It's cleansing day. Okay, the tabernacle has been mucked up by the inadvertent sins of Israel. Maybe some of them went in there when they were in a state of ritual impurity. Maybe some of the sacrifices were not done 100% correctly. Maybe even just the moral sins of Israel have somehow morally stained the tabernacle. And Yahweh says, listen, I don't like my house dirty, so either you guys clean it once a year or I'm out of here. I'm moving out. Okay, I'm moving out. Okay, so that's basically what Yom Kippurim is. And when Moses enters, we'll see this in Leviticus chapter 16, when Moses enters the Holy of Holies on the 10th day of the 7th month, he cannot look directly at the glory of Yahweh that lives on the ark cover between the cherubim. He has to come in there with incense that, I'm sorry, is it incense? Yes, he takes incense, he puts it on a fire pan, and the smoke from the incense makes a cloud that covers the glory of Yahweh between the cherubim on the cover of the ark of the covenant. And so Moses does not look at the glory of Yahweh directly. He cannot. Anyone who sees me will die. Okay, that's what That's exactly what Yahweh says to Moses when Moses asks him to see his glory. Actually, we can look at that for 1 second. That's Leviticus 16. Okay, so it's fine. So this is how. Oh, what? I have a little bit of a cold for some strange reason, even though it's May. Let me just find the exact. Excuse me. Okay, let's do this here. So this is Leviticus 16:2. I'm just going to read in the English. Tell your brother Aaron that he's not to come whenever he chooses into the most holy place. That's the Holy of Holies, that inner sanctum. Behind the curtain, in front of the atonement cover. The atonement cover is the kaporet. That's the ark, the cover of the ark of the covenant on the ark, or else he will die. For I will appear in the cloud over the atonement cover. The kavod Yahweh, the glory, lives between the cherubim on the atonement cover. It's a horrible translation. On the cover of the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, let's even get a picture of that. Picture's worth 1,000 words. Okay. Okay, we've seen it a bunch of times before, but okay, there we go. Okay, so that is the Ark of the Covenant. Those are the cherubim, and between the wings of the cherubim, between the faces of the cherubim, right there in the middle, that's where the glory of Yahweh lives. And we see that Moses cannot see it, or I'm sorry, Aaron cannot see it. The Kohen Gadol, that implies. If he sees the kavod Yahweh, he will die. Okay. And so what does he have to do? He has to go through an entire ceremony, which we won't get into right now, but I want to get to the main point. Here in Leviticus chapter 16, verse 12, he's to take a censer. Censer's a frying pan, not a censor, not like a Ring doorbell or something like that. He's to take a censer, a frying pan, full of burning coals from the altar before the Lord. The altar before the Lord. There are two altars. There's the altar out in the courtyard. That's the altar of sacrifices, which we've spoken about extensively, studying Leviticus 1 through 7, because we've spoken about sacrifices. And then there's the altar before the Lord, which implies the incense altar. Okay, that's inside the holy area, right outside of the curtain that separates between the holy area and the Holy of Holies. And 2 handfuls of finely ground fragrant incense, and take them behind the curtain. So he takes fragrant incense. He takes from the incense from that is to be burnt on the incense altar, puts them on a frying pan, brings them up in smoke. You've all seen the pictures of like the Havdil, the church, the elder walking around with the incense thing, swinging the thing, and smoke comes out of it, right? So it's the same idea, except much more smoke, hopefully. And he's to put incense on the fire before the Lord. Okay. Meaning on that frying pan, on that censer, and the smoke of the incense will conceal the atonement cover above the tablets of the covenant of the Lord of the law, so he will not die. Okay, so there we go. The one time that we can enter, that any Israelite can enter into the Holy of Holies, is on the 10th day of the 7th month. This is the Day of Atonement, and it's the Kohen Gadol, the only person who can enter. The Kohen Gadol can enter, and if he enters into that Holy of Holy area, he can only do so with incense burning on a frying pan, on a censer, on a pan, which covers the whole area with smoke, so that it conceals the kavod Yahweh, the glory of Yahweh that lives between the cherubim on the ark cover. Okay? Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom, Paul. He had you. All right. So that's what we see in Leviticus 16. Getting back to where we were before in Exodus, in the end of Exodus, and then we'll unwind and go back to where we are today. We'll go back to the English on this one. And so getting back to this is moving day. Yahweh moves in, but Yahweh doesn't move in. He doesn't have any presence on the earth, but what lives on the earth, quote unquote lives, because again, it doesn't even have any physical properties. It doesn't take up space. It's not energy. It's not matter. It's something else, spiritual energy, if you want to call it that. But that's what lives, quote unquote, lives on planet Earth. This glory of the Lord, Kavod Yahweh. Going on in Exodus 40, in all the travels of the Israelites, whenever the cloud lifted from above the tabernacle, they would set out. But if the cloud did not lift, they did not set out until the day it lifted. So the cloud of Yahweh was over the tabernacle by day, and the fire was in the cloud by night, in the sight of all the Israelites during all their travels. So that cloud, in which was the glory of Yahweh, rested on the tabernacle. The glory of Yahweh moves into the tabernacle, and that is the end of the book of Exodus. So the book of Exodus ends in a very beautiful way, right? It starts with the story of the Exodus itself, okay, and ultimately ends after the giving of the 10 commandments on Mount Sinai. Ends with the tabernacle being set up and Yahweh moving into the tabernacle, and that's it. That's the end of the book of Exodus. Now, when we get into Leviticus, nothing has been done. It's just that Yahweh moved in. Nothing has been sacrificed yet. Nothing has been done. There was no one to sacrifice to. Yahweh wasn't even living there. If you bring a sacrifice, then in a sense you're bringing a false sacrifice, because Yahweh's not even living there. So you can't sacrifice, right? So finally Yahweh moves in. And then Leviticus 1 through 7 speaks about, now it goes into the instructions about the basic types of sacrifices that will be offered in this tabernacle complex, right? On the altar of sacrifice. And in one case, some blood is sprinkled onto the kapor, but irrelevant. That's not irrelevant, but in the altar of sacrifice, okay? So that was the Leviticus 1 through 7. But nothing has been done in this tabernacle yet. It's just that at the end of the book of Exodus, Yahweh moved in. Now we have 7 chapters explaining the details of the 5 basic types of sacrifices, but none of them have been brought yet. And then finally, in Leviticus 8, which we're going to pick up now, this is the first time that the tabernacle is actually being used. Okay? It was built, Yahweh moves in, that's the book of Exodus ends. Okay? Leviticus starts, chapters 1 through 7, explanation of the 5 basic types of sacrifices that will be brought in the tabernacle/temple later on. And then finally, in Leviticus 8, now we're going to inaugurate the priests, ordinate the priests, and then we're going to start seeing the first sacrifices that are brought in the tabernacle. So this is actually a big day. This is the beginning of sacrificing to Yahweh after the Exodus from Egypt as a nation of Israel, right? With the instructions of the Torah. So that's where we are. We're in Leviticus 8. Any questions, any comments before we move on? She got water, but I'll do that in a little while. All right, and then let's move on. Sound is good? Everything's good? Okay, cool. Okay, all right, let's move on to Leviticus chapter 8. We'll switch over to the Hebrew now. So we read verse 1. Let's start in verse 2. קח את אהרון ואת בניו איתו ואת הבגדים ואת שמן המשחה ואת פר החטאת ואת שני האלים ואת סל המסות. Okay, so take Aaron and his sons. Aaron represents the high priest. Aaron was the high priest, the first high priest. And his sons, those represent the regular priests, the assistant priests, you could put it that way. And their clothing, their special garments, which were described extensively in the book of Exodus. And the anointing oil. Okay, mishcha means anointing. That's where we get the word Mashiach, Messiah, comes from this word here. This means the oil of anointing, the oil that is poured over the head of kings, priests, when they're inaugurated. Wa'et par hachatat. Interesting. Par hachatat. Par is a bull. Chatat, we know, is 5 types of offerings. Okay, we learned about the chatat in Leviticus chapter, was it 4? I believe chapter 4. Let's bring that up for a second. Okay, so this was the sin offerings. That's a chatat. Okay, where is it? Well, you get the idea. Sin offering. Okay, so now we see that in the inauguration, they're to bring a bull for a sin offering. Why are they bringing a bull for a sin offering? Well, we have so much more context for that right now because we learned about the sin offerings. In fact, we didn't call it sin offering. We called it a recompense from inadvertent sin offering. So this is an offering that is supposed to be recompense for any inadvertent sins, any inadvertent transgressions of the commandments of Yahweh. Well, what could be going on? I mean, the Kohanim were not even installed yet, and they already have inadvertent transgressions. Well, this is maybe could be thought of as a preventative sin offering, or anything that might have been done in the setting up of the tabernacle. But the basic idea is that if Aaron and his sons, or if anybody in contact with the tabernacle had committed any transgressions against the very specific instructions of how to set it up, how to operate within it, then they had inadvertently committed a sin. And so they, in order to cleanse themselves, in order to recompense, in order to gain atonement for those inadvertent sins, a sin offering, a chatat, a recompense from inadvertent sin offering, needs to be brought, right? Now that we know the 5 basic types of offerings, that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Okay. Shne elim. So the 2 rams. Okay, so why the rams? Well, we'll see later on. But the ram is associated with guilt offerings. Evet salamatzot, and the basket of unleavened bread. Okay, so these are all of the things, all of the elements that are going to be needed in order to do this inauguration ceremony, which is going to involve a number of different sacrifices. Salamatzot, okay, the basket of unleavened bread. Well, we know that unleavened bread, we know from Leviticus chapter 2, now that we know the 5 types of sacrifices, we know that unleavened bread is the only type of bread that is allowed to be brought as a grain fire offering. Okay, we've spoken about a bunch of times the difference between a grain offering that's not a fire offering and a grain offering that is a fire offering. So an example of a grain offering that is not a fire offering would be the Omer offering, spoken about in Leviticus chapter 23, where you bring a sheaf of the first fruits of the barley harvest. We were just speaking about this on the WhatsApp group. A sheaf is a big bundle, basically, of the stalks of the barley, of the first fruits of the barley harvest. And it's called either sometimes a wave sheaf offering or an elevation sheaf offering. Either you wave it up and down or you lift it up. Omer. And but none of it is, no portion of the Omer offering is thrown onto the fire, is thrown onto the altar of sacrifice. However, we know that with grain offerings that are where a portion, sometimes translated as a memorial portion, is thrown onto the altar of sacrifice, we know that those offerings can never ever consist of leavened bread, as opposed to, let's say, the 2 loaves offering, spoken about also in Leviticus chapter 23, that is brought as the first fruits of the wheat harvest on the festival of Shavuot, which will occur at the culmination of the counting of the 49 days, the counting of the Omer, which we're in the middle of right now, and which are one of the members in both the World Alliance of Qara'im WhatsApp group and the Biblical Calendar Society group is being very miduyak, is being very careful to post it every day. We really appreciate that. That's Nathaniel, so thank you if you're here. And so at the end of that, a new grain offering is brought, which represents the first fruits of the wheat harvest, and that's brought on Shavuot, on the day after that 49 days, Macharat, on the day after the 49th day. Okay, all right. So let's go on, verse 3. Wa'eth kol ha'ida hel el petach ohel moed. So gather together the entire congregation to the entrance of the tent of meeting. What does that mean? The entrance of the tent of meeting. that we've seen this expression before. Let me bring up again tabernacle map of the tabernacle. Where's the one we usually use? I think this one. It's a good one. There we go. Okay, so this is the entrance of the tent of meeting right here. So before the entrance of the tent of meeting basically means it's a way of saying the courtyard. Okay, so all of Israel, all Israel would gather in the courtyard, but I guess in and around the courtyard, because we know there were approximately 600,000 men of military age in Israel at the time, and so, but at any rate, they're to gather in and I guess around the courtyard, and now the Levites are going to be installed. Verse 4. ויעש משה כאשר excuse me, כאשר ציווה יהוה אותו, and Moses will do as Yahweh commanded him. In other words, everything that was detailed in the book of Exodus. And the congregation gathered around the entrance of the tent of meeting in the courtyard of the tabernacle. And Moses said to the congregation, this is the thing that Yahweh commanded to do. Just checking if there are any questions or comments. I think we're good. Okay, verse 6. ויקרב משה את אהרון ואת בניו וירחץ אותם במים. So Moses brought forth Aaron and his sons, the assistant Levites, וירחץ אותם במים, and he bathed them in water. And this is all spoken about in the book of Exodus. We won't track it down right now, but these details are the application of what Moses was commanded to do, and it's detailed in the book of Exodus, in the latter half of the book of Exodus. Verse 7, ויתן עליו את הכתונת, ויחגור אותו באבנת, וילבש אותו את המקעיל, ויתן עליו את האפוד, ויחגור אותו בחשב האפוד, ויאפוד לו בו. Okay, so this is speaking about the garments of the Kohen Gadol, again, which we looked at extensively in the book of Exodus. So the ketonet is translated as the robe, I think. How did they translate here? The tunic. Yachkoroto ba'avnet. The avnet is the sash they often translate it as, or the belt. Yalbesh et ha'me'il. The me'il is what goes over the ketonet. That's a long blue thingy. Let's, again, here's worth 1,000 words. Let's make it visual. So garments of the high priest. Okay. Let's see. Oops. Oh, darn. What did I do? Oh, darn. Hold on a second here. Let's try that again. Oh, it's a YouTube video. That's why. Oh, okay, I see. Okay, good. We'll just leave it like that. Okay, well, there you go. The blue robe. This is the me'il. The ephod is this multicolored thing that goes over it, etc. Okay, we're not going to go over it again, but all of the garments of the high priest. Verse 8. Oops. Verse 8. וישם עליו את החושן, וייתן אל החושן את האורים ואת התומים. So he placed upon him. Just a second here. And he placed the choshen. What is the choshen? The choshen is the breastplate of judgment. The choshen mishpat, usually translated as the breastplate of judgment. Right? This thing, this beautiful element over here with the 12 stones. Right? The 4 rows of 3 columns. The 12 tribes of Israel. We tended to el choshen et ha'orim v'et tumim, and he placed upon or in or with the breastplate, the Urim and the Tumim. Okay, what are the Urim and Tumim? Nobody really knows. but some kind of oracular device. It could be, a lot of times it's depicted as being in the pockets of the ephod, but these are all guesses. Nobody really knows exactly what the Urim and the Tumim are. Verse 9, Vayisem et mitznefet al rosho. What's the mitznefet? The mitznefet is usually translated as the diadem. Okay, that's this golden ring, I guess you can call it, this golden plate that goes around his forehead and says Kadosh Yahweh, holy to Yahweh. Waisem ala mitznefet el mul panao et tzitz zahav. Oh, I'm sorry. The mitznefet is my mistake. The mitznefet is the turban, and the tzitz zahav, that is the diadem. Nezer kodesh kashetziwa Yahweh et Moshe. Okay, I don't want to get belabored on this. Basically, he dresses up Aaron Gadol in his priestly garments. We've studied that in previous studies. Why yikach Moshe et shemen hamishcha, and Moses took the anointing oil. Why yimshach et hamishkan, and he anointed, yimshach, poured oil over, Mashiach, Messiah. Messiah just means the one who is anointed, the anointed one. And anointed just means in biblical Hebrew and in modern English literally means having oil poured over your head. That was the way that people were anointed in ancient times. Maybe in some places still in modern times. And he anointed the tabernacle and everything that was in it, and in doing so sanctified them. Okay, so again, we're not going to go back to Exodus, but this is all described in detail in Exodus, and now it's being done. Wiyaz mimenu al hamizbeach sheva paramim. Why yimshach et hamizbeach wa'et kol kela wa'et hakior wa'et kano lekadshom. Yaz, so Yaz is to sprinkle or spray. So he sprinkled from it. From what? From the anointing oil, al hamizbeach, on the altar. Which altar? The altar of sacrifice out in the courtyard. 7 times. So yimshach et hamizbeach, and he anointed the altar and all of its vessels. Et the kior is the washing basin. Again, if we look at the map, there's the brazen altar. That's the washing basin. Okay, no, they did that wrong. This is the brazen altar. I don't know why they put here brazen altar. That's a mistake. That's the washing basin. That's the kior. Wa'etz kano lekadsho, and the stand for the washing basin. Let's move on. This is not important, obviously, but not the main point of our study this week. Wa'etz ok mishemen hamishcha al rosh Aaron, and he poured from the anointing oil on the head of Aaron. Why yimshachoto lekadsho, and he anointed him in order to sanctify him, or in doing so sanctified him. Verse 13, Vayakrem Moshe ed bnei Aaron. So that's speaking about the anointing. Verse 12, the anointing of Aaron. That's the Kohen Gadol. That's the high priest. Vayakrem Moshe ed bnei Aaron, and Moshe brought forth the sons of Aaron. That means the regular priests, the lay priests. Vayalbishem kutanoth. And basically, he dresses the assistant priests, the lay priests, in the lay priest garments, which are not as fancy as as obviously as the Kohen Gadol's garment. Again, it's a tunic, it's a sash or a belt, and then it's a turban or a hat. Okay, so that's it. So now Aaron and his sons have been officially anointed, but the ceremony continues. Verse 14. Wayagish et parachatat. So he brought forth, and this is Moses, right? Moses is the subject of this, right? In verse 2, Kach et Aaron. This is God speaking to Moses and saying, take Aaron and his sons. So Moses is the one doing all the action here. He's the subject of all of these activities. Yigash et parachatat. Waismoch Aaron ubanav et yadeim al rosh parachatat. So Aaron and his sons laid their hands on the head of the bull of the bull for the sin offering. Okay, so here's the sin offering we spoke about. Let's go to verse 15. וישחט, ויקח משה את הדם, ויתן על קרנות המזבח סביב באצבעו, ויחטא את המזבח ואת הדם יצק על יסוד המזבח, ויקדשהו לכפר עליו. So he slaughtered the bull of the sin offering bull, and he took the blood, or he took some of the blood, and he placed it or rubbed it on the horns of the altar. Okay, horns of which altar? The altar of sacrifice. This altar here, the brazen altar. Okay. קרנות המזבח סביב באצבעו with his finger, ויחטא את המזבח, and in doing so he cleansed. Okay, יחטא. So this is essentially he cleansed. In other words, he achieved recompense for any inadvertent sins. Okay, so יחטא את המזבח, so he cleansed. Well, let's see how they translate it here. Purified, okay. יחטא את המזבח ואת הדם יצק על יסוד המזבח, and the rest of the blood he spilled at the base of the altar. ויקדשהו לכפר עליו, and he sanctified it by, or in doing so, atoned for it. So there is now this bull, the sin offering bull, is being used to what? To purify the altar of sacrifice. Okay? Verse 16. ויקח את כל החלב אשר על הקרב ואת יותרת הכבד ואת שתי הכליות ואת חלבהן ויקטר משה המזבחה. And then Moses took all of the forbidden fats, which were delineated when we spoke about the sin offering in chapter 1, 2, 3, chapter 4. Okay, so he's taking the forbidden fats and he's throwing it onto the fire on the altar as he's supposed to. Remember, all of the forbidden fats. Why are they called forbidden fats? Because if it's a sacrifice, the only place they go is on the altar. The forbidden fats are forbidden to us. They're the ambrosia of Yahweh. They're the ambrosia of the Torah. They're the food of not the gods, but the food of our God, the God. Okay, that's the forbidden fats. We are not allowed to eat them. Only Yahweh eats, quote unquote, eats the forbidden fats. So that's what he's doing, as he's supposed to. ואת הפר, ואת עורו, ואת בשרו, ואת פרשו, שרף באש מחוץ למחנה, כאשר ציווה יהוה את משה. And the rest of the animal, the rest of the bull, its skin, its flesh, its entrails, he burnt it in the fire outside of the camp, as Yahweh had commanded Moses. So we know that this is exactly what's supposed to be done. If we go back to Leviticus chapter 2 for a second, I'll just go back Leviticus chapter 4, go back to the English. So with the sin offering, so this is the bull. So this, remember, there are four contexts. I don't like to call them types of sin offerings. It's all sin offering, but there are four contexts for sin offerings. And this is probably, it seems, the one this is going to be for the anointed priest, meaning the Kohen Gadol. So it's a young bull. That's the par. That's what we saw in Leviticus chapter 8. And we know basically that it's slaughtered, and then the entire thing, the forbidden fats are thrown onto the altar. Okay. That's what we see right here in Leviticus 4:10. Then the priest shall burn them on the altar of burnt offering. And then all of the rest, this is what we see here, that's what we just read in chapter 8. All the rest, he must take outside the camp to a place ceremonially clean, often called the ash heap, where the ashes are thrown, and burn it there in a wood fire on the ash heap. And that's exactly what we see being done in Leviticus chapter 8. The only thing that's not being done, and maybe it's just not being described there, is that he's supposed to, maybe it is actually, hold on. I might take that back, but let me just say it first. With the sin offering for the Kohen Gadol, for the high priest, he's supposed to collect the bull's blood and then sprinkle it on the curtain that separates between the holy area and the Holy of Holies. In other words, the curtain that's right outside the Ark of the Covenant. And let me just see for 1 second. וישחט ויקח משה את הדם ויתן על קרנות המזבח סביב באצבעו ויחטא את המזבח ואת הדם יצח. 1 second here. Just give me 1 second. Then you don't have to be sure to take some of the bull's blood and carry it into things, dip his finger into the blood and sprinkle it in the current. So then puts okay. So I what's going on? Okay. So it doesn't mention explicitly that the blood is being sprinkled on the curtain, but when it says here, yes, this is clearly referring to the incense altar. So yes, this, okay. Okay, so Moses slaughters the bull. He takes its blood and he rubs it on the horns of the altar. It doesn't say which altar, but by comparing with Leviticus chapter 4, this must be the incense altar, because we see in Leviticus chapter 4 that with the sin offering, let's just read this very briefly. Verses 7, actually just verse 7. The priest shall then put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of fragrant incense that is before the Lord in the tent of meeting. The rest of the bull's blood he shall pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering at the entrance of the tent of meeting. So that's what we see here. Okay, again, I'll read this. Moses slaughtered the bull. He slaughtered it, and then he took the blood and rubbed it on the horns of the altar. So based on what we know from Leviticus 4, that has to be the altar of incense. Okay, where's the altar of incense? The altar of incense is right here. This is the altar of incense. Okay, so that's what he's doing right here in verse 8. And in doing so, he purifies. He gains atonement from sin, any inadvertent sin for that altar. And then he takes the rest of the blood and pours it at the base of the altar of sacrifice. And that's exactly what we see here in Leviticus 4. The rest of the bull's blood he shall pour out at the base of the altar of the burnt offering at the entrance to the tent of meeting. That is the altar of sacrifice, the brazen altar here. Okay, so it doesn't mention explicitly that he takes some of the blood and sprinkles it 7 times on the curtain. Where's the curtain? The parochet. Close this out. The curtain is this right here. Okay, either on or before, in front of the curtain. But I think it can be implied that he's doing that. It just is describing it in brief, because we already know what is to be done. So this is essentially fulfilling the rules, the laws for the sin offering. In what context? Remember, there are 4 contexts for the sin offering. And this is the sin offering for the high priest. Okay? So remember, the 4 contexts for the sin offering: the high priest, the entire community, a leader, and a member of the community. And as we go down, the ceremony becomes less, shall we say, serious, or not serious, it's not the right word, but less severe. There are less things that are done. So only for the first 2, for the high priest and the entire community, is the blood collected and then brought inside the holy area, sprinkled on the curtain, and then rubbed on the altar of incense. Okay. One second. Surely for the Lord sometimes he's with the blood on the altar. Yes. Okay. So that what we see here is basically Moses. He's carrying out the ceremony because the Levites have not yet been installed. So Moses is basically the priest, so to speak, until the Levites are installed. He's fulfilling the priestly duties here. He won't right after the Levites are installed, but until then, he's fulfilling the priestly duties. He's like, you could call it the proto-priest. Okay, the meta-priest, maybe. We'll go with the proto-priest. Shabbat shalom, Mar Yanana Miknana, Banana. Banana fana, faux fana. Okay, so this is exactly what is prescribed in Leviticus chapter 4 when we're speaking about the sin offering. Okay, we see it right here. So this puts so much context into it. Now that we know what the sin offering is, we know what's supposed to happen. We know the four contexts for the sin offering. Again, the high priest, the entire congregation, a leader, and a lay Israelite. Now we know that this fulfills exactly what's spoken about for the sin offering for the high priest, that first type, and we see that's being followed basically to a T. Moses is doing it, and he's doing it to I would say preventatively or preemptively atone for any inadvertent sins that the high priest or the assistant priests might commit, or alternatively, maybe that they've already committed in helping set up the tabernacle. I think actually my belief is that it's meant to be preemptive. Okay, so that, oh, what happened there? Get back here, you. Back. What happened to our Hebrew? Okay, so you see how, oh, what's going on here? You see how understanding the details of the offerings, which again, I don't want to repeat myself ad nauseum, but I will at least one more time, probably another 100 times. But you see how understanding the five basic types of offerings, what their contexts are, what their meanings are, gives us so much more context here. It's a sin offering that's being brought. Where were we? Right here. Okay. It's a sin offering that's being brought, and we know what a sin offering is. Let's bring up our spreadsheet. Just give me a second here. There it is. Sacrificial laws. Oops. Try that again. Okay. So it's not complete. I have to go back and finish this off whenever I get a chance, or maybe even next year when we study it again. But sin offering. Oops. One more second, please. So sin offering is what we're calling a recompense from inadvertent offense offering. Okay. So that gives us a lot of understanding. It gives a lot more context for what's going on here. Next, we're going to bring a burnt offering. What's a burnt offering? If we go back to our spreadsheet, then we see we're calling a burnt offering a fully burnt or a Holocaust offering. It's basically your basic type of offering. Okay. It's kind of a general offering in a certain sense, and it's brought in a lot of different contexts, but it's basically like if you want to bring an offering, then not as an individual, but if the nation wants to bring an offering, then they're going to bring this burnt offering. So let's see what happens here. By the way, let me check. Any questions, any comments so far? No? Okay, let's move on. So now a burnt offering is going to be brought. ויקרב אל העולה ויסמכו אהרון ובניו את ידיהם על ראש העיל. So what is an ayil? An ayil is a ram. Let's go back to burnt offerings. So it can be, we saw it can be either from the herd or the flock. So if it's from the herd, that doesn't apply to us. A ram is not from the herd. A ram is an adult male sheep. So if it's from the flock, it can be either from the sheep or the goats. It's to be a male without defect. And here we have all the laws. You were to slaughter it at the north side of the altar before Yahweh, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall splash its blood against the sides of the altar, etc. Okay, so you can either offer a from the herd, meaning a bull or a cow. Actually, it's a male, so it has to be a bull. You can offer from the flock. That means either a sheep or a goat, and it has to be a male, so it's either going to be a ram or a he-goat. Or you can offer a bird offering, and it has to be either a dove or a young pigeon. Okay, so this is the second type. This is now going to be from the flock. It's going to be a male sheep, also known as a ram. And that's precisely what we see here. So Aaron and his sons, they're going to lay their hands on the ram. Verse 19 and 20. He's going to gather the blood and then splash it or spill it at the base of the altar. That's exactly the rules that we see in chapter 1. So now Moses is going to cut it into pieces and throw it up on the altar to go up in smoke, including the head and the pieces that are cut up, the pieces of the flesh, and the fat. So everything with a burnt offering goes onto the altar. Nothing is except for the skin. The skin is given to the Levites. We saw that last week. Except for the skin, everything's thrown on the altar. The forbidden fats are always thrown on the altar. That's the pader that we just saw. But this time the head, which is often discarded in other types of sacrifices, the legs, which are discarded in other types of sacrifices, the entrails, everything goes onto the altar except the skin. Why is that so? Because it is a fully burnt or a Holocaust offering. Okay? It's basically, again, how can we explain it? It's your basic type of offering. It's usually accompanies other types of offerings. Okay? Its purpose is kind of like, hey God, I want to sacrifice something completely to you. And here it is. I'm taking an entire animal and I'm sacrificing it to you. It's not per se an atonement for sin. It's more like honoring Yahweh completely in a certain sense. So at any rate, if we were to go back to verse 1, we would see this is exactly what is prescribed. Oh, I'm running out of battery fast. We may have a problem, but I'll do the best I can. We may have to cut this study short. I will try my best. At any rate, let's see. Well, we'll keep on going. At any rate, verse 21. So he takes the kerev is the entrails and the legs. He washes them in water because they're disgusting. Okay, they're full of blood. And Moshe threw all the entire ram, or all of the ram, onto the altar to go up in smoke. Olahu. It is a burnt offering, a fully burnt, a Holocaust offering. The reach nichoach, as a sweet-smelling scent. And we saw that also in Leviticus 1, that the burnt offering is a sweet-smelling scent. Isheh, a fire offering. What is a fire offering? A fire offering is an offering, any offering in which a part of it, or at least a part of it, in this case the whole thing, except for the skin, at least a part of it goes onto the altar of sacrifice. And these are for all of the 5 basic types of offerings, these are all fire offerings. There are other types of offerings which are not fire offerings. We mentioned the Omer offering. We're counting the Omer right now. The Omer was brought on the Sunday, which was Monday night began the 7th day. So Sunday night began the 6th day. So Saturday night into Sunday began the 5th day, which was brought this year on the 5th day of Chag HaMatzot, of Passover, quote unquote. So if we had brought an Omer offering, it would have been brought on the 5th day of Passover. And that is not a fire offering. It's a grain offering, but it's not a fire offering. No part of it ends up on the altar of sacrifice. It's taken, a sheath is taken and waved up and down. That's why it's called often the wave sheaf offering. But this is a fire offering. Okay, all the basic 5 types, including in chapter 2, Leviticus chapter 2, where we learned about the grain offering. That's a grain fire offering. A portion of it is taken and thrown onto the altar of sacrifice. Okay? So, Hu Yahweh kashet tziwa Yahweh et Moshe. So this is exactly as Yahweh commanded Moses. Okay. So there we go. Sin offering, fully burnt or Holocaust offering. Okay. Verse 22. So now we're going for the ram of consecration. Vayekrev et ha'ayel hasheni ayel miluim v'yismechu Aaron ubanao et yadam al rosh ha'ayel. So now Moses brought forth the second ram, and this is now called El HaMiluim. What is Miluim? Miluim is the fulfillment of office. Translated here as consecration. I don't like that translation. The ram of filling one's office, of fulfilling one's office. If you live in Israel, you know Miluim in a very different context, but it's the same word. It comes from here. Miluim means fulfilling one's role, okay, or the inauguration of fulfilling one's role. So the second ram that's brought, and this is the ram of Aaron and his sons beginning to fulfill their roles. V'yismechu Aaron banav et yadem al rosh ha'ayel, and Aaron and his sons rested their hands on the head of the ram. V'yishhat v'yikach Moshe midamo v'yitin al tnuch ozen Aaron hayimanit v'al bohen yado hayimanit v'al bohen raglo hayimanit. So Moses slaughtered it, and he took of its blood. He took some of its blood, and he placed it on the earlobe of Aaron, the right earlobe of Aaron, and on the right big toe of Aaron. On the right big hand, the right big thumb of Aaron, and the right big toe of Aaron. So on his earlobe, on his right thumb, and on his right big toe, basically from head to toe, quite literally. Now, this is not one of the 5 basic sacrifices, but this is discussed in the book of Exodus, that this is what is to be done for the inauguration of Aaron. And if we track that down for a second, if I can find it, let's see, it's going to be around Exodus 35 or so. Let's see, if I can't find it in a minute, we just won't track it down. No, it's going to be before tabernacle. 1 second. The ark. No, this is going to be before this. So let's try Exodus 30. I'll give it a minute. If I don't find where it is, then we'll just skip it. The altar of incense. Atonement money, basin for washing, anointing oil, incense. Exodus 31. Selling Holiab. Golden calf. Definitely not there. Tent of meeting. Glory of the Lord. So we spoke about the glory of the Lord before, right? Remember this. This is after the golden calf, and Yahweh wants to destroy the nation, and Moses saves them, and then he asks. Then this is a side note, okay? But as long as we spoke about it before, I'll just read this very quickly in English. And Moses asks to see the glory of the Lord. Moses said to Yahweh, "You have been telling me, leave these people, but you have not let me know who you will send with me. You have said, I know you by name, and you have found favor with me. If you are pleased with me, teach me your way so I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people." Skip over to 15. Then Moses said to him, "If your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know?" Oh, excuse me. "How will anyone know that you are pleased with me, with your people, unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth?" Yahweh said to Moses, I will do the very thing you have asked because I'm pleased with you and I know you by name. So Moses asks basically God to not abandon the people of Israel, and God agrees. And Moses says, let me press my luck a little bit further. Okay, what do they call this? Foot in the door. Okay, I got Yahweh to agree. I got God to agree to this. Let's see if I can get what I really want next. Then Moses said, now show me your glory. He just goes for it. It's almost like, when you're, I don't know, when you're courting a, a girl, okay? And, you go in, you make your move, you give her the kiss and she doesn't reject. And then next you go for, well, we won't get gory here, or we won't go into all the gory details, but you go for a nice big kiss on the lips. Okay. So Moses went for the kiss over here, the little peck on the cheek, and God said, okay, he agreed. So now Moses really goes for it. Show me your glory. Don't say that to a woman, please. And the Lord said, oops. And the Lord said, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, Yahweh, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. But he said, you cannot see my face, so no one may see me and live. Adam lo yir'eni v'chai are the words in Hebrew. Okay, you cannot see my face. You can't see my glory directly. Okay, and in the Hebrew, I don't want to go into the Hebrew right now. I want to get back to our main point here. Okay, you cannot see panai. You can't see my glory directly. And then Yahweh says, there is a place near me where you may stand on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock and cover you with my hand, quote unquote, until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand. You will see my back. Or in other words, you'll see the aftermath of my glory passing by. But my face, in other words, you cannot look directly at my glory, must not be seen. Okay? So that, again, uh, uh, ties into what we were saying before regarding the glory of Yahweh. Okay? All right. Okay. So going back to Leviticus chapter 8. So the ram of consecration. We were looking for the ram of consecration. Let me go a little bit further. I can't find it now. It doesn't matter. It's spoken about in the book of Exodus, and now it's happening. So this is not one of the basic types of 5 basic types of sacrifices, but it is a special sacrifice or a special offering that's brought that is described in the book of Exodus. Verse 24. ויקרב את בני אהרון וייתן משה מן הדם עד תנוח אוזנם הימינית. So the children of Aaron, Moses brought forth the children of Aaron, meaning the lay priests, and Moses placed the blood or rubbed the blood on their earlobes, on their right earlobes, and on their right thumbs, and on their right big toe. ויזרוק משה את הדם על המזבח סביב, and then Moses splashed or spilled the rest of the blood around the base of the altar, around the altar of sacrifice. Verse 25. ויקח את החלב ואת העלייה ואת כל החלב אשר על הקרב ואת יותרת הכבד ואת שתי הכליות ואת חלביהן ואת שוק הימין. So basically took all the forbidden fats plus the right right thigh, the right loin thigh. And let me just see something. So there was a specific type of sacrifice which involves the right thigh. Let me just see if I can find it here. So there it is. We started in Exodus 30. It's actually in Exodus 29. I started one chapter too late. Let's just go back to that for 1 second. So here's the consecration of the priests. Okay. So this is what we're speaking about here. This is Exodus 29. This is what they're going to do for the inauguration. Take the other ram, and Aaron and his son shall lay their hands on the head, etc. Okay. And this is the ordination ram. Okay. And I just want to see one thing. Leviticus 7:32. If we go there for a second. So Leviticus 7:32. Right. So if we read in 7:32, this is talking about a fellowship offering, also called a peace offering, or what we're calling a communion offering. That's from Leviticus chapter 3. So they bring the fat together with the breast and wave the breast before the Lord as a wave offering. The priest shall burn the fat on the altar, blah, blah, blah. You have to give the right thigh of your fellowship offerings to the priest. Now, so it's not. Okay, it mentioned the right thigh, so I thought maybe it was a peace offering, but it's not saying so. Okay, this is a special offering. This is the inauguration offering. Okay, let's go on. Verse 6. I'm sorry, verse 26. Misal hamatzot asher lifnei Yahweh lakach chala masa achad, chalat lechem shemen achad, ורקיק אחד, וישם על חלבים ועל שוקי ימין. And from the basket of unleavened bread, which is before Yahweh, in other words, which is there in the courtyard, he took challah, he took a piece. Let's see how they translate challah. A cake, okay? A cake of matzah, one cake of matzah, and one cake of oiled bread, unleavened bread, and one cracker, and he placed them upon the fats and on the right thigh. Okay, verse 27. Waiten et hakol al kape Aaron wa al kape banao, and he placed all of that stuff on the hands, on the open palms of Aaron and al kape banao, and on the open palms of his sons. Wa'inepotam tnufa lifnei Yahweh, and he waved them up and down as a wave offering before Yahweh. So this is, and actually this lechem here, maybe this was leavened because this is not a fire offering. It's not thrown on the altar. It's a wave offering. We said that non-fire offerings, such as the Omer offering, well, the Omer offering is not leavened, but the 2 loaves offering on Shavuot can be leavened. As long as it's not thrown onto the fire, it can be leavened. So that might actually be leavened bread there. At any rate, all of this stuff is placed symbolically on the hands of Aaron and his sons, and then they're waved up and down. The hands are maybe moved up and down. Again, it's not clear. If you read different commentaries, you'll see different explanations. But this is again everything that's described back in Exodus 29 about the inauguration. So by symbolically moving Aaron and his sons' hands up and down with this sacrificial stuff in their hands, this is their way of essentially offering them to Yahweh. Of course, we're not going to throw Aaron and his sons onto the fire, so they're not going to be a fire offering. They're going to be a wave offering. But in a certain sense, they are now offered as a wave offering to Yahweh. Verse 28. Vikach Moshe otam me'al kapehem ve'ekter mizbecha ala olah. Okay, so then this lechem had to be unleavened bread. Because now all of that stuff is thrown onto the fire to go up and smoke. I mean, thrown onto the altar to go up and smoke. Ala olah, on the burnt offering. Okay, the burnt offering is here. The miluim him, it is the inauguration offering or the fulfillment of office offering. Lereach nichoch, as a sweet smelling scent. Ishe hu liyahweh, it is a fire offering to Yahweh. And if it's a fire offering, then it must be, all of the breads that are mentioned here must be unleavened bread. No leavened bread, no yeast, no honey can go on my altar. Verse 29. Vayikach Moshe et achazeh, and Moses took the breast, and he waved it as a wave offering before Yahweh. Me'el hamiluim, and this was from that ram, that second ram, the inauguration ram, or the inauguration into office ram. LeMoshe haya lemana kashet tzivat Yahweh et Moshe, and then it was Moses's as a portion. In other words, he could eat it, this breast, as Yahweh had commanded. And we would see all of these instructions in detail in Exodus 29, but I don't want to go back there. Okay. but it's the fulfillment of the instructions that are mentioned in Exodus 29. Verse 30. Vikach Moshe mishemen hamishcha, and Moses took from the anointing oil, umin adam asher ala mizbeach, and from the blood that is on asher ala mizbeach, that is on the altar. And I think that means that was spilled at the sides of the altar. Yaz al Aaron al bigadao, and he sprinkled it on Aaron and on his clothing. And I never really understood this, to tell the honest truth. Right here are these beautiful here are these beautiful pieces of clothing, these very, very special, expensive garments, and now blood from this inauguration offering is being sprinkled on those clothing, on those pieces of clothing, just as we saw in the case of the sin offering. In the first two contexts, that blood is sprinkled on the curtain that separates between the holy area and the holy of holy areas. Well, that's a sin offering, so maybe we can expect that as part of it, something nice has to be messed up symbolically. But to sprinkle blood on these beautiful garments, I have to honestly say I've never understood this. If anyone has an explanation, please let me know, because that is always never really made sense to me. But that's the instructions. And on his sons, and on the garments of his sons, et Aaron wa et bigadao, and he sanctified Aaron and his clothing, et banao wa et bigdei banao ito, and his sons and his sons' clothing along with him. Okay, so this is the inauguration offering. Verse 31. Wayomer Moshe el Aaron wa el banao, and Moses said to Aaron and his sons, Bashlu et basar petach oel moed, sieve, boil the flesh at the entrance of the tent of meeting. That means in the courtyard of the tabernacle. Was sham tochluoto, and there you shall eat it. Wa'et halechem asher b'sala miluim, and also the bread, the unleavened bread, which is in, I believe it's unleavened, which is in the basket of the inauguration offering. Kashet ziveti lemor Aaron ubanav yochluhu, as I commanded, saying that Aaron and his son should eat it. And again, all the details are in Exodus 29. Verse 9, Wanotar babasar ubalechem ba'esh tisrafu, and anything that's left over from the flesh and from the bread that goes along with it shall be burnt in fire. Not on the altar, but just burnt in fire. In other words, it should not be left over, because that would be, if it starts rotting, that would be disrespectful. That would be an abomination to let a sacrifice to Yahweh start to rot. Verse 33, Umipetach ol moed lo titz'u shiv'at yamim, and from outside of the entrance of the tent of meeting, lo titz'u shiv'at yamim, you shall not go out for 7 days. And petach ohel moed, again, so this is sometimes misinterpreted, meaning that, again, let's look at our map here. This is the ohel moed, the tent of meeting, and it says, do not go out from the entrance of the tent of meeting for 7 days. So some people I've heard say in the past, that means they have to be inside this area here for 7 days. That's not what it means. Petach ohel moed, the entrance of the tent of meeting, we saw many times before in Leviticus chapters 1 through 7, that means the courtyard. Okay, the entrance of the tent of meeting is a synonym. It's a synonym for the courtyard. So they're not allowed to go out of the courtyard. They're not allowed to go out of the tabernacle area for 7 days. Ad yom milot yemei miluechem, until the day of the completion of the days of your inauguration. So it's a 7-day inauguration where they now have to stay in that area. Yeshivat yamim yemale et yetchem, because it will take 7 days for your, I'll just paraphrase here because it doesn't translate well word for word into the English. It will take 7 days for your inauguration to be complete. Verse 34. Kasher sa b'yom hazeh siwa Yahweh la'asot lechaper alechem. And as he did on this day, it is what Yahweh commanded in order to gain atonement for you. Okay, in other words, this entire ceremony. Upetach ol moed tishvu yomam u'layla shivat yamim. And at the entrance to the tent of meeting, again in the tabernacle courtyard, you shall remain tishvu literally sit, but it means remain for 7 Yomav Alayla, day and night, Shivat Yamim, for 7 days. Shematim et mishmeret Yahweh, and shall keep the mishmeret. They usually translate that as the guard. Let's see how they translate it here. The charge. Mishmeret Yahweh. So mishmeret means, yeah, I guess guard. It really means like the like a security guard would keep a mishmeret. Okay, security guard. It comes from the underlying word shomer or shamar, which means to keep or guard. So it basically means stand guard. Maybe that's a better translation. Shematim et mishmeret Yahweh. So maybe we'll translate this: you shall stand guard for Yahweh. Velo tamutu kiken suveti. I think that should be tziveti. But so you shall stand guard for Yahweh, meaning those 7 days. And I can relate this to some other things, and maybe I will in a second. Down to 26%, and I have no way to charge. We're probably going to have to end within 20 minutes or so, but it's okay. We finished Leviticus 8. So you shall stand guard for 7 days as I commanded. And if you, in order that you don't die, in other words, this is this is what you need to do. You cannot exit for 7 days as part of your inauguration process. You cannot exit that tabernacle courtyard for 7 days. If you do, you will die. In order that you don't die, and you're going to stand guard for 7 days. Because so I have commanded, or so you were commanded. And Aaron and his sons did all of the things which Yahweh had commanded at the hand of, or through the hand of Moshe. Okay, so this is very interesting, this idea of mishmeret. Okay, and I'll relate it to, see if I can find it. Is it Exodus 13, if I'm not mistaken? The Exodus 12. Exodus 13. Let's see if I can find it. So the firstborn. Crossing the sea. No, it's before this. It must be Exodus 12. 1 second. Exodus 12. Actually, I could just go to it. 1 second here. Let me just find it. It's Haftarah. Just give me 1 second here. There it is. Exodus 12:42. So if we go back to here, Exodus 12, let's look at it. We have it in the English, so let's look at it. So this is the actual Exodus. I'll pick it up here. Now, the length of the time the Israelite people lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430 years, to the very day, all Yahweh's divisions left Egypt, because Yahweh kept vigil that night to bring them out of Egypt. On this night, all the Israelites are to keep vigil to honor the Lord for generations to come. Let's look at that in the Hebrew. Pick it up here. So it was at the end of 430 years. That on this very day, that all of the armies of Yahweh, the hosts of Yahweh, meaning the Israelites, exited from the land of Egypt. Leil Shimurim hu liyahweh lahotzi'ah me'eretz Mitzrayim. So this is a night of, they translate it as a night of vigil, but it's a night of standing guard. Okay, it's that same word, that same root that we see here in Leviticus 8. Okay, that the the Kohanim should stand guard, okay, Mishmeret, Yahweh, they should stand guard for Yahweh or to Yahweh or in front of Yahweh for 7 days by not leaving the tabernacle courtyard. Okay, you see here Mishmeret. Okay, we translate that as Shematim Mishmeret Yahweh. You shall keep the standing guard to Yahweh for 7 days, speaking to the Kohen Gadol and the assistant Kohanim. And here in Exodus 12, we see it's a Mishmeret Leil Shimurim. It's a night of standing guard. It's a night of vigil. Hu Yahweh. It is a night of vigil to Yahweh. The Hotziame Eretz Mitzrayim, to take them out of the land of Egypt. Okay, and here we have the Atnach, the Atnachta, that represents the first half of the verse. Hu Halayla Hazel Yahweh, and this night is Le Yahweh Shimurim. It's a night of vigil to Yahweh. The Chol B'nei Yisrael Ledoratam, for all of the children of Israel throughout their generations. So what does it mean, Leil Shimurim? Well, in the context of the Exodus from Egypt. Well, we always like to separate between that first Passover and subsequent Passovers because there are different rules. We won't go into the details now, but we've discussed it before. So on that first Passover, what does it mean that it's a night of vigil or a night of standing guard to Yahweh? Well, remember that the Israelites were to bring the Passover sacrifice after the sunset, and then at midnight, Yahweh went through, or the Mashchit, the destroying angel, went through all of Egypt and killed all of the firstborn. But the Israelites were not to exit their houses, until the morning, until the sun shone in the morning, and then they all went out of Egypt. So they're huddling in their houses, waiting for Yahweh. They're standing guard, they're standing vigil, waiting for Yahweh to do his thing. Okay? Then he comes around midnight, and he kills all of the firstborn in all of Egypt, right? From the firstborn of Pharaoh to the firstborn of the prisoner that was in the dungeon, including all of the firstborn animals. And there was a great cry, there was a great scream, a great cry in Egypt. So that happens at midnight. Then in the morning, time to get out of Dodge. Sun rises, time to go. Got to get out of here. Moving day. So just think about it. If you were an Israelite, you're told on the 10th of the first month to take the lamb, to take the Passover offering and keep it for 4 days. So you're waiting. On the 14th day, at night, after the sun sets on the 14th day, so I guess that's 5 days because it's 4 days inclusive, 5 days later, okay? Then when the sun sets on the 14th, slaughter the lamb, take the blood, dip hyssop into it, rub it all over the doorposts, and then wait. Take it in your house, eat the Passover offering with your staff in your hand, your sandals on your feet, your loins girded, your belt, your robes tied around your body. In other words, ready to go. You're sitting there, huddling inside your house, waiting for Yahweh to kill the firstborn, and then waiting to get the message, to get the signal, to get the heck out of Dodge. Okay, so you're sitting there. You're standing wait. You're standing guard. You're waiting for Yahweh. You're holding a vigil. I won't say holding a vigil because that has other implications. But you're standing guard, waiting for Yahweh. It's a Leil Shimurim. It's a day. It's a night of standing guard. It's a night of holding. I don't like the word holding a vigil. It's a night of standing guard, waiting, right, for Yahweh. Then at 12 midnight, Yahweh sends the Mashchit, the destroying angel. He goes around, kills all the firstborn. But you're not allowed to leave the house. You wait inside the house all night. You hear the screams of all the firstborn in Egypt, or the screams of all the people, not the firstborn because they're dead. The screams of everybody else in Egypt crying that their firstborn is dead, that people are dying all over the land. And you're huddling inside your house. It's the middle of the night. You hear all of these screams, okay? And you still have to wait. You have to wait until the morning, until Yahweh says, time to go. Sun rises, get the heck out of there, okay? That's the idea of a Leil Shimurim. You're standing guard, you're standing wait for Yahweh to do his thing and to give you the signal to get the heck out of Dodge. right? That's the idea. Shabbat Shalom Yadin. Okay? Lotzi'ah me'eretz Mitzrayim. So you're standing guard for Yahweh to what? Lotzi'ah me'eretz Mitzrayim, to take them out of the land of Egypt. That's what the Israelites are standing guard for. They're waiting. They know this is the day. I mean, try to put yourself in it. It's so hard. This is what we're supposed to do each year by bringing the Passover sacrifice, which we can't do right now, by celebrating Chag HaMatzot, especially that first night where we're supposed to retell the story. Hey, imagine what was going on there. You've been stuck in this shithole for 400 years. You're slaves. You've been oppressed. You've been beaten. And now, slowly but surely, you're being freed. And now this is the big moment. Okay. And you're just sitting there waiting for the other shoe to drop. You're waiting for this thing to finally end, for this big moment to finally end for your oppressors. Okay. If anyone has been in a horrible relationship and finally you have something, it's a long process. You're stuck. And finally you have the guts, this is it. Time to get out. Time to go. Okay. I'm done. I've done everything. Okay. I could do. And now I have to have the guts to just go, whatever the consequences. It's kind of the same thing. And so the Israelites are sitting, waiting around for Yahweh to do this for them, to get them out, finally, to end this saga that's been going on for hundreds of years. Okay? That's the idea. This is like the last night, waiting for Yahweh to finish off this portion of their history as a nation, their life as a nation. Okay? So halayla hazeh Yahweh shimurim. So this very night is a night of vigil to Yahweh. L'chol b'nei Israel, for all the children of Israel, the dorotam, throughout your generations. So this can mean a number of things. Okay? This can mean that you're supposed to remember that original night, as a night of vigil, as a night of waiting for Yahweh. Or it could mean that you're supposed to kind of feel it each year, right? You're supposed to wait for Yahweh symbolically each year. I think this is where the rabbis come up with the idea of doing the Passover Seder all night long, which, quite frankly, you guys know I'm not a big fan of the rabbis, but I don't think it's a direct fulfillment of the mitzvah, but maybe it's keeping the spirit of this idea of it being a Leil Shimurim, of it being a night of vigil, waiting for Yahweh. By staying up all night long, retelling the Passover story, maybe that is, in a certain sense, fulfilling this idea or expressing this idea of it being a Leil Shimurim, a night of vigil, a night of waiting for Yahweh to do his thing. But just imagine, again, like the tension, the excitement, the fear, all mixed into one that must have been going on. The Israelites, our ancestors, they're huddled in their little homes. They can't go out. They've placed the blood on their doorposts. They're waiting for something to happen. They don't know exactly what's going to happen or when. They hear these huge screams in the middle of the night all throughout Egypt. Everyone's dying. And then the morning comes and sun shines and off they go out. Okay? Trying to put it in that kind of context. So that's what we have here. You feel that? You feel that, Marianana McNana? Since I know that you do, because we've had many conversations about stuff like this. Okay, so maybe you will soon have a Leil Shimurim. All right. But that relates, or I won't say relates back, but it's the same word, it's the same root that's used here, that the Aaron and the sons, the high priest and the assistant priests, are to stand vigil to Yahweh for 7 days. They're not allowed to leave that area, that courtyard of the tabernacle. In other words, this big area that's enclosed here by the curtains that go around the tabernacle. Okay? And so they do. And that's exactly what they do. And that ends Leviticus chapter 8. Any questions, any comments? Why did you last ignore what I posted? It's a legit statement. What did you last post? I'm not sure what you're talking about. Until that very day you have brought the offering, you shall need no bread. What are you specifically referring to? How can it be brought on the 5th day of Chag HaMatzot? It should be before Pesach. I don't know why. Why should it be before Pesach? It doesn't say when it is. Leviticus 23 does not give a specific date for the bringing of the Omer offering. It only says Mimacharat Shabbat, on the day after the Shabbat. It doesn't state explicitly which Shabbat. So sadly, I mean, I won't say sadly, but the reality is that we've had to extrapolate. And the Karaite tradition is that it's on the Shabbat that falls within the 7 days of Hakham Melech. Hakham Melech is a 7-day holiday. It begins exactly a week later after it starts. I mean, aside from the change in the time of the setting of the sun, but essentially it ends a week later after it starts. So it covers exactly 1 day of each week. So there's only one Shabbat, one and only one Shabbat. You can't eat bread until the sheaf offering is given. Oh, I see what you're saying. You're saying that, well, there's nothing that says that that matzot that's eaten in Passover is of the new grain. There's nowhere that it says that that matzot is from the new grain. You can't eat new grain from the new harvest until the Omer offering is given. But you can eat grain and bread from the old offering. I mean, from the previous year's harvest. Okay, so the implication there is, or the understanding is, that if they only ate manna until that day, correct? That's in Joshua chapter 6. It does speak about that. Yes, that is true, but that's a very special case because that's when they were coming into the land of Israel. Again, the typical Karaite understanding, you could make, I'm not saying your claim is wrong, you could make a claim for that. But the typical Karaite understanding, and Karaite understandings don't come from nowhere, they come from a lot of thought, is that or traditionally speaking, that Shabbat is understood to be the Shabbat that falls within the 7 days of Chag HaMatzot. And if that is the case, then until that offering is brought, you're right. Any of the matzot that would be eaten up until then must be from the old harvest, from the previous year's harvest, not from the new year's harvest. Okay, but there is a lot. I'm not saying you're necessarily wrong. Okay, but it would be we would open a whole can of worms, and I'm down to 16%, which means I'm going to have to end the study soon, probably within the next 5 minutes or so. So I can't get into it now. That would be a whole study in and of itself. But it does say that the Omer offering is brought when the sickle is first wielded against the standing grain. Okay, so I've thought about this myself actually many times and said that really maybe that Shabbat, since it's not explicit, is not necessarily the Shabbat that occurs within the 7 days of Chag HaMatzot. Maybe it is before. Maybe it is after. Maybe it's whenever the barley harvest starts. It might occur around the time of Chag HaMatzot, but it doesn't necessarily. It's not pinned to be that the day after that Shabbat that is this that occurs within Chag HaMatzot by the text of the Torah. Maybe one of these days we could talk about this in more detail, but I can't now. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you. I'm saying it's ambiguous in the Torah. But what I will say is that the traditional Karaite understanding, because the Omer offering is mentioned after Chag HaMatzot is mentioned, okay, it's a fair belief. It's possible. I would definitely be interested in hearing your specific arguments. Why you think it's before Pesach? I don't think there's any indication that it has to be before Pesach, because I don't think there's any indication that the matzot that are eaten on Chag HaMatzot have to be from the new harvest. They could be from the previous harvest. But you could make a case for that. At any rate, we're not going to get into it right now. Okay, what we're going to do, I now have 14%, so I'll have to end the study probably within the next 5 to 10 minutes. Let's move on to Leviticus 9. We won't study it today. We'll do it next week. Okay, so Leviticus 9 continues on. So now the priests in Leviticus 8 have been inaugurated. And now, once they've been inaugurated, now they can start getting down to business. What is the business of the priests? Well, a bunch of different things, but one of the main jobs of the priest is to officiate the sacrifices, right? To officiate over the sacrifices. And that's exactly what we see them start to do in Leviticus chapter 9. So we're going to do that next week. Hopefully I'll have my electricity situation set up better so I don't have to end it early. And then in Leviticus 10, we'll get into, maybe we'll do 9 and 10, or we'll try to do 9 and 10 next week. Then we get into the sin of Nadav and Avihu. So they do something really stupid. Okay, they bring a fire offering, or they bring an incense offering. Oops, that they're not supposed to. Now this makes a lot more sense in the context of what we've seen. We've seen these very specific laws. The laws are very specific on how you're supposed to bring sacrifices, in what contexts you're supposed to bring sacrifices. And now Nadav and Avihu think they're like going above and beyond, but what they're really doing, and we'll speak about this if we get to it next week, is they're adding to the Torah. Lo tosifu v'lo tigra'u. Do not add to and do not take away from the instructions that I've given you. They're adding to the Torah. Adding to the Torah is just as bad as taking away from the Torah. You think you're doing extra. You think you're doing God a favor by doing something extra, but you're not. You're doing something. If you add to the Torah, you're doing something as bad, as sinful. I don't like either of those words, but as unproductive as being in violation of the Torah, as if you were taken away from it. And this is, I think, one of the main crimes of the rabbis. They add to the Torah. They add so much to the Torah that it doesn't even resemble the Torah anymore. And I have a video that I made many, many, many years ago, but people seem to like it a lot, so maybe I'll just post it very quickly, which speaks about this very issue. Let's see if I can find it here, the link to it. Just give me a second. Where is it? A second. Oh, I think I have to go to this. This one. So do not add to and do not take away from the Torah. That kind of sums up my viewpoint on it. I did this many years ago, I think in 2009, but I'll post a link to it. Oh, there you go. It's in the chat. So, right. So that is the main crime of Nadav and Avihu, and we could see what a horrible thing it is to add to the Torah. Nadav and Avihu are put to death. They're burned by the very fire that was supposed to come down and burn up the incense that they brought. Instead, it burns them to death. And Yahweh is telling us there, don't think you're going to get extra credit. Don't think you're going to, kiss my butt in the sky. I shouldn't really be saying that about God, should I? Don't think you're going to flatter me, or don't think you're going to win extra brownie points with me by doing something more. That's what the rabbis think. That's what the rabbinites think. That's what the Karaites think. Okay. Oh, we are so holy. We are so pious. We are the closest, so close to God because we do so much. Okay. We, I don't know, stand on our heads while, brushing our teeth because some rabbi in the 12th century said that, that this is what it means to, I don't know, guard your bodies well or something like that. Right. We do so much. We are the most pious people. No, they're not the most pious. They're less pious. Adding to the Torah is just as bad as taking away from the Torah. And that was the sin, the crime of Nadav and Avihu, the first and second born sons of Aaron. And they paid for it with their lives during this, what was supposed to be a happy period, during this entire inauguration ceremony, or right after it. So we'll talk about that. Okay. But that's it. I'm almost out of battery. So let me throw it out to any questions and comments. And I think we'll end it here. I think it was a good study, shorter than usual. Maybe shorter is actually better. But we went through Leviticus chapter 8. We'll just review. We'll sum up. These are the various offerings that are brought with the ordination, the inauguration of Aaron and his sons into their office as high priest and assistant priests. And we saw a number of different types of offerings. We saw a sin offering first. sin offering. And then we saw where was it? Then we saw the dressing of Aaron and his sons with their priestly garments. That's here. Then we saw the anointing of the tabernacle and Aaron and his sons. Then we saw the presentation of the sin offering. Then the presentation of a burnt offering. And then we had an ordination offering, which was described as a special offering spoken about in detail in Exodus 29. And then we had the instruction to Aaron and his sons, who had just been anointed, who had just been inaugurated, to keep a vigil, to keep watch for Yahweh for 7 days by not leaving the courtyard of the tabernacle. Okay, and then again, the next chapter in Leviticus 9, after the inauguration is done, on the 8th day, and that's why this parsha is called Shmini. In Hebrew, 8 is Shmone, 8th is Shmini. So on the 8th day, now they've finished that inauguration ceremony. They've finished that 7 days of standing guard for Yahweh, to Yahweh. And now we can start the sacrificial system that is going to continue for hundreds and hundreds of years, essentially until the temple is destroyed. I mean, some breaks here and there, but until the temple is destroyed by the Babylonians in 585 BCE. Okay, first in the tabernacle, and then later on in the temple that's built by Solomon. Okay, so with that, we'll end it there. I thank you all for joining me. We'll go out with some music and a little bit of remaining battery that I have left. And Be'esarat Yahweh, we will pick it up again next week. So I wish everybody Shabbat Shalom and a Shavuot Tov. And we will see you guys again soon. Shabbat Shalom, Shavuot Tov.
Na 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 na. Nay nay nay. Nay nay na na nay. Hashem Melech. Hashem Malach. Hashem Yimloch. Leolam va'ed. Hashem Melech. Hashem Malach. Hashem Yimloch. לעולם ועד. והיה השם למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד. הוי ננאי 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 נאי נאי ננאי נאי 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 נאי. השם מלך, השם מלך, השם ימלוך לעולם ועד. השם מלך, השם מלך, השם ימלוך לעולם ועד. והיה השם למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד. הוי והיה השם למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד, אוי נה נה ניי נה ניי נה 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 ניי 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 נה 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 ניי 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 נה ניי אוי ניי 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 נה ניי נה ניי נה ניי נה 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 ניי 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 נה 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 ניי 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 נה ניי 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 נה נה ניי והיה השם למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד, אוי והיה השם למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה השם אחד ושמו אחד, אוי נה 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 ניי ניי נה נה ניי 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 נה ניי 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 נה ניי נה ניי נה ניי נה נה ניי ניי נה נה ניי 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 נה ניי אוי ניי ניי נה נה ניי שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך, יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא